Ukraine war, Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested there should be an interim government in Ukraine under the support of the United States. Now, this comes as he argues that elections could then be held to hand power to a capable government and to also begin peace talks. We have details in this report.
Ukraine's European allies say now is not the time for lifting sanctions on Russia, in a clear message to Trump administration, as Moscow pushes Washington for concessions ahead of signing a U.S.-brokered deal on ending the fighting in the Black Sea. The leaders of the United Kingdom, France and Germany all affirmed at a summit on Thursday that Europe will not lift sanctions on Russia, a strong and seemingly coordinated nod to the Trump administration, which has said it is still evaluating the Kremlin's demands. They spoke after a meeting in Paris, which discussed how to bolster support for Kyiv and what role they might play if a peace deal is struck with Russia. The Trump administration's willingness to embrace Moscow as it seeks a quick end to the war against Ukraine, which has included vocal support for key Russian demands even before talks had even begun, has alarmed European allies, while divisions remain among European leaders about how to respond. They spoke in unison on Russia's demand to ease sanctions. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin suggests the possibility of an interim government in Ukraine, established with UN supervision. President Putin says the transitional administration would hold an election with the aim of choosing a new government that could begin peace talks. This comes as European leaders have called for more pressure on Russia to bring about an end to the war. The head of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office says Russia is trying to derail the path to peace by choosing to continue the war. The regional leader revealed that on the ground, fighting is still on, as one person was killed in Russian strikes on Donetsk. The Air Force adds that 163 drones were shot down overnight. Attacks on Russia has also continued, with its Air Force claiming to intercept 78 Ukrainian drones.
An international law expert, Livingston Welcher, joins me on the news to discuss Putin's suggestion of an interim government for Ukraine. It's good to have you join us on the World Now. The United States has rejected Putin's call for an interim government, but considering what we've seen in the past, we've seen both sides renege on agreement. How significant is the U.S.'s statement?
Well, it's getting more interesting. Unfortunately, the war is turning into, it's going beyond just a war. It's become a theater of dramas, diplomatic dramas and razzmatazz. How do you begin as an adversary, dictate with your opponent how it structures itself in terms of governance before it begins to engage you? Of course, you know that is not plausible. Ukraine is a sovereign state. Russia is also a sovereign state. Ukraine is not at the behest of Russia. So at this time, I think what Putin is doing is to distract the peace moves in seeking to bring this war to an end fairly. What Russia is also doing is to also push itself and to cajole Ukraine into early submission. But you see, the Ukrainian law allows the president in a time of war to remain in power, even when his mandate elapses, like Zelensky's mandate elapsed in 2024. So at this time, Putin should also consider, he has been in power for about 25 years, much longer than Zelensky has been. And even the opposition in Ukraine has given Zelensky the mandate to continue as president in this time of war. So there is no home front opposition or question around his legitimacy, as it were. So I think that what should be happening now, if indeed Putin is interested in a call for a truce, which is about the loudest demand from around the world, is to also give room for concessions, because there has to be concessions, except it's not peace we are talking about. Even though America has made proposals and recommendations for an unconditional ceasefire, which Russia has rejected, but I think Putin should not take it beyond this point, but also give some concessions if indeed he's open for a negotiation for peace.
I mean, so many persons have said, the backing that the U.S. has always given Russia, especially in finding a level playing ground for both sides, is what may have given, Putin sort of an idea of dictating some of the terms of a ceasefire deal or a truce. But some persons are saying, what is an interim government actually going to do for Ukraine at this time? So talk to us about what an interim government is likely to do in Ukraine in terms of reaching an agreement, perhaps to end the war or a ceasefire deal. It may not be so much of a bad idea in that sense.
No, Ukraine is not bound by the suggestions or recommendations of Putin. Their president is Vladimir Zelensky, and there is a Ukrainian national law which allows Zelensky to function as president in a time of war. Putin lacks the capacity or the right to dictate what form of government Ukraine should operate at the time of negotiation between both countries. No, he doesn't have that right to dictate those terms, and the U.S. knows so. Even if Putin has tried to portray Zelensky as an unworthy president, as a drug addict, as a neo-Nazist, he may have called him all sorts of names and branded him with all sorts of unprintable adjectives. But the fact remains that the UN cannot begin at this time to supervise Ukraine as though the country does not have its own self-imposed leadership. There is a leadership in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have accepted Zelensky as their president at a time like this. The UN cannot interfere with that fact. There is nothing the UN or the US can do about it. So it is for Putin to, yes, he has a right to make his own expressions, but he doesn't have a right to dictate the government that should be in place in Ukraine.
All right.
Except he doesn't, he now sees Ukraine as an annexed region entirely, which has now become an entire part of Russia, which the Ukrainians have not accepted. And if he is continuing with that narrative, it means that he's actually not interested in peace. But I think he's interested in peace, but he just wants to cajole Zelensky out of power because he believes that upon the exit of the former U.S. President Joe Biden, that Zelensky has become handicapped. But I think Zelensky has also played a smart card by conceding to the U.S. intervention, and Putin should also consider these factors to discuss. This war
let's talk about the possible options here. The position of Russia and Ukraine is really far apart from what you've observed. Would you really say that the negotiators from the U.S. have been able to narrow some of these rifts and make an agreement more likely in both cases, considering the frosty relations that we've seen between President Trump and Zelensky in the past?
Yeah, of course. Putin has some form of advantage over Zelensky at this time. You can't rule that fact out because there is a history behind Trump and Putin in terms of their diplomatic ties. And the U.S. has also used that during the engagement between Trump and Zelensky at the White House in no too distant past. But the point is, I think the grounds have been set by the U.S. I think because of the concessions that Zelensky has also made to Trump after the altercation at the White House, after the heated engagement, that concession from Zelensky, who has now made a call to say, look, we're interested to discuss peace and chart a way forward. But Russian position appears to be undermining the proposals and recommendations that the U.S. has made. But it's not a totally bad case because I think there is an interest that Russia is pushing or driving at. The common interest of Russia at this time during this negotiation is that Putin does not want to sit with Zelensky on a negotiation table because their enmity has gone beyond just the war. They've taken it very personal. But I think at this time, the US has set a template which both states should consider. And also maybe the European Union community should step up their game by standing behind Zelensky, because if at this time Zelensky feels handicapped and not properly supported, Russia will in no distant time overrun Zelensky. But you must also commend Zelensky's stance so far in sustaining this war, because when this whole special operation, as Russia calls it, started, it was expected that within days, Russia would decimate Ukraine, just as they have said that in the course of this whole arrangement, they are going to, overrun the Ukrainian army in the forefront. So I think the template has been set. Russia should consider this so it does not drive further into a more complicated situation.
Right. We could sense the enmity on both sides, especially when you look at the delegates that was sent by both parties through the ceasefire agreement in Qatar. But that's how much time we can, take for that conversation today. International law expert Livingston Weche, thank you for talking to us at this time.